Welcome back to the second video. On this video, we're going to create our first React components. So in the Notion page, we're going to click on two links. First, the HTML page link, which is going to open this CodeSandbox environment. And we're also going to click on the React page, which is going to open a brand new CodeSandbox in React, so we can transfer our HTML page into the React page. So as soon as you click on the React one, you can click on fork, so you can fork and create your own copy. So let's inspect the HTML page and see what we have. Let's make this browser a little bit smaller. We only have an index.html, and on this page we have some information about a user, a user page that we have here. So if we look at the UI, we have a header which has three links to different sections in the project, in the page. So we click on projects, it is going to take us to the project section of the page. We have a intro section, which is this is our header here. This is everything we see at the top. And then we see in the main tag, we see the first section is the intro section, which is everything we see here, a header, photo, and some text, divided by a HR at the bottom. Then we have the experience section here, which is this section here from the experience heading to these two experience paragraphs that we have here in this section. So they are divided by a div. They both wrap the first experience and then the second experience. This is kind of like mimicking a small resume of a user. The last section we have is the project section. So in the project section, we have an HR dividing the other section. We have three projects. We have a heading, we have project 1, project 2, and project 3. So we can see here. And at the bottom, we have a small footer, which only contains the credit for the images that I use from Unsplash, all the way at the bottom here. So what we're going to do with this, we're going to transfer this HTML page to our React environment to create a brand new React application with this HTML that we have here. So if we go over to the user page, we can see that we have our app.js. This is our main component. Every other component that we're going to be creating is going to be rendered as a child of the app.js. So it's going to be rendered inside of the app.js file in this section. So let's take a look at what we have in here at the top. The first thing we see inside the body, we have a header. The header is displaying an H1, displaying a navbar with some ULs, LIs, and anchor tag that is going to take you to the different sections of the page. If we want to transfer this here, we can create what we call in React a component. So a component is a piece of UI that we can reuse throughout different pages or different sections in our application. So in order to create our first component, let's right-click on source and create a new directory. Let's call this directory components and hit enter. Inside the components, we're going to create a new file. Let's call this one capital H header.js. In React, all your components names for the files, they need to be capitalized. So capital H header.js should be the name of your file. Inside this file, we're going to create a function, and we call this function header with capital H. A component is a function. In React, a component is just a function that is going to return some syntax that we call JSX. So in this case, we have a function. We want to return something, some syntax that looks like HTML is called JSX. JSX allows you to use HTML syntax and JavaScript at the same time. So in here, we're going to create, let's put a parentheses and hit enter. Right, let me just create some space at the top so you can see it a little bit better. And at the bottom, we're going to make sure this component can be export outside of this file. So we're going to type export default header. Right, so a component is just a function that is going to return some JSX. So right now we have a function. Now we need to return some JSX. If we look at the header in the HTML page, we could grab everything that is here from the header tag all the way down to the closing header tag. We can copy that and we can bring it over to inside of the return statement here and paste it. And then we can save it, and CodeSandbox is going to refactor your file, right, to be more readable. And right now, this is a component, right? The two main rules of a component could be a function or a class component, but right now we're working with functional components. And it needs to return some JSX. Right now we have both. So let's see how we can use this component to start building the same page we have in HTML. We can build it in React. So we need to make sure we are exporting the file. We can put it at the bottom. And then after saving, Control S to save your component or your file, you can come back to app.js. And we're going to import the component at the top. Import header from that /components/header. Right, first we import the file. We can get rid of these h1 and h2 inside of the div. We can get rid of it. And now a component is a function. So we normally, when we want to execute a function, we need to call the function. So we pretty much doing the same thing, but we're going to call it this way. We need a less than and then the name of the header. And then right now we're going to use the self-closing tag syntax to call this functional component. And we're going to save. Right now everything is centered, so we can get rid of this the app class here, just so we can have everything with the normal layout. And this was taking the CSS from here, which was centering our app. So right now we can see how the header matches what we have here. We have the h1, we have the ULs, LIs, and anchor tags being rendered the same way. But now it's in its own component, and you can reuse this component. You can call this component multiple times in different pages. Later we're gonna see different pages. Right now we're just working on a single page. But if you copy down the header and you save the file, you get two headers being rendered to the screen. All right, so you can reuse those components throughout your application. All right now we got the header. So we're going to repeat this for the next section. We are going to we have the header here. We can have the HR inside of the app.js and the main tag also inside the app.js. So let's head over back to the app.js. Let's put in HR here. We can definitely do this right like this. Then we can have a main tag here, just so we can have the same layout as the HTML page. So /main, so we can close this one up. Right, okay. So inside of the main tag, we're going to render the rest of the page. we need to create a new component for our intro section, right? This is going to be a section. It's going to start here all the way here, right? So let's do, this is called intro. So we can go back to the React application. We can right click, or we can click this new file icon here. We're going to call this one intro section, or just intro.js. We're going to save it. Make sure it's capital I. And we're going to again create a functional component. We're going to call it intro, and we're going to return some JSX, just like we did with the previous component. All right, so let's go back to the HTML page. We can copy the section with the ID of intro. We can copy that, and we can bring it over to the intro component in the React application. Let's paste it there and save. Right now, we need to make sure we export default our intro file or functional component. Right now, if we hover over this, we get a little warning saying that the O tag is redundant. So we could maybe remove this for now, so we can get rid of the warning, those yellow lines that we saw there at the a second ago. So let's save the file. Make sure you hit Ctrl S, and then let's go back to app.js. We're going to import the new intro component. Oops, let's delete this one. CodeSandbox imported it for me. So we could go inside the main component. Make sure you have components /intro, and then we're going to call or render our intro component like this. Okay, so we got the header, we got the HR here, the little line divided into two sections, we got the main tag, and we got an intro component. Right, so we are building up the same page we have here. We're just breaking down each section into different components so we can see how you can reuse your components if you need to reuse them throughout different pages or different sections of your pages. So the next section we're going to bring over is going to be the experience. Right, so the experience starts here, line 44. And it ends in line 65. Let's go back here, and after the intro, let's just put it HR so we can have that line there. Right now we're repeating this a little bit, but we can see how we can do this in a better way later. So the next one we're gonna create, let's see, in the HTML experience, we can come back and we can create a new component. Let's create a new file inside the components folder. We can call this one experience.js, capital E. We need to have all capitals in our file names here. Again, let's repeat the same thing, function experience. And this is gonna be a function which is going to return some JSX, which we're going to add in a second. Let's go back to the HTML page. Let's copy the section with the ID projects. We can highlight all of this. We can copy the experience, and we can bring it over to the experience component. We can paste it in here and save. Make sure we export default the experience component so we can use it in another page. Default save experience experience. All right, there we go. Now that both of them are matching, and now we can make sure we Control S so we can save it, and we can go back to the app.js, repeat the same step, import experience component, and every time I click to import, it is going to import the component for you, and then we can call or render the component in the section that we need. Save, and now we got the experience section being rendered. Cool. So far so good. Let's go back to the HTML, and the last section we have is the section for the projects. This is the biggest section we have right now. We're just going to copy the same, so everything, the whole section. Later we can break down this section, each project, into a smaller component. For now, let's just keep it into one big section so we can create the same page in the React application here. So let's go back to the React project, and we're going to create a new component. Let's call it projects.js. Inside here, one more time, another function, which is another component. This one is called projects, and we want to make sure we return some JSX. So now we're going to go back to the HTML page, and we're going to copy this section projects all the way down to the closing project section here, line 115. Copy that, bring it over to the React application. And again, we get this yellow warning. Let's just delete the redundant explanation of what the photo is showing. We can just get rid of that for now. And at the bottom, later we can add something more descriptive. At the bottom, let's just make sure we export default projects. Cool. So right now we created the component. We don't see the component on the page yet because we created the component, but we're not calling or rendering this projects component. So let's go back to app.js. Let's import projects from that /component/projects. Oops, /projects. There you go. And let's put another HR here and render or call our projects component so we can see it on the page. And there you go. You have all the projects being rendered on the browser. Now for the last section, let's just grab the footer. The footer has the credits for the photos of this page that I use. So let's just create another component really quick. So we have that repetition, footer.js. If you want, you can pause the video and try to implement the footer by yourself. Go through the steps, and then you click play and see how to do it. So let's go back to the HTML page, and we're just going to grab the footer all the way down to the closing tag here. Be careful when you highlight and copy code. Then we're gonna bring it over and create a new function, footer, which is going to return some JSX. Right now, we're putting normal HTML, but later we're going to mix HTML and JavaScript inside of the return statement, which is actually returning JSX. We can use HTML syntax, but also JavaScript in here, as we're gonna see later on in the next videos. Let's just make sure we export default the footer component. right? Again, we created the footer component. We don't see it until you go back to the app.js and render or call the component. So let's go back to app.js, import footer from that /component/footer. And let's put another HR here and render our footer component. Now let's scroll down, and we can see the footer at the bottom. Right, so now the page looks just like the page that is using OHTML. Look at the page, looks exactly the same. You can go here and you can click on the navigation and jump to different sections. If the page is too small, you might not see how it jumps, but we can see that we can click on projects and we go down to the project section of our page. We can also have different divs in here, but right now we want to keep it simple just so we can see how we can create different components, how we can inside of those components return some JSX, which is just HTML and some JavaScript that we're going to write a little bit later in the next upcoming videos. So that's it for this video. Right now we have the same page, a static page, which is rendering the same thing we were rendering on the HTML page. Just remember, we like to organize our components in a folder called components. Later we're going to create a folder called pages to create different pages in our application when we do routing. So remember that you can also, in your app.js, you can reuse your components. For example, if you have the intro and you will need to render the intro again, right? You can call that component or render the component more than once. So this makes your components reusable because it's just the same as creating a function, and using the function multiple times is the same thing that happens with components. Right, so this is it for this video. We'll see you in the next video where we're going to talk about more about JSX in React. See you there.